Story 1. The Jogger's Pact. It started as a midnight habit. Kayla liked the quiet when the streets were empty and the world seemed to breathe slower. Her midnight jogs through the city park became a ritual after her breakup, sweating out the anger, loneliness, and desire under the silver glow of the moon. The park was nearly empty most nights, just the soft thud of her sneakers against the pavement, the rustle of trees, and the occasional night owl. But there was always someone watching. Kayla knew it deep down. The electric charge on her skin when she ran past the dense wooded trails, the subtle scent of aftershave lingering faintly on the breeze. It was like being stalked by the night itself. Then one evening she noticed him. Leaning against the lamppost, half shrouded in darkness. He had this raw, magnetic aura. Sharp jawline, piercing eyes, wearing black joggers and a hoodie. Their eyes locked briefly as she passed him. His gaze wasn't just observant, it was hungry. Kayla's heart pounded, but not out of fear. There was a flicker of something else. Curiosity. Attraction. On the third night, he appeared again, this time jogging behind her at a steady pace, the sound of his steps matching hers. Each time she glanced back, he was closer. When she finally stopped to catch her breath, he approached without hesitation. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said, voice deep and smooth. "Neither should you," Kayla replied, pulse racing, equal parts adrenaline and intrigue. Their conversation was laced with subtle innuendo. The charged tension between them felt like an unspoken challenge. Before she knew it, they were running together, weaving through the park's shadowed paths. The encounters continued night after night. A silent agreement formed. They didn't exchange names, just shared these dark, sweat-slicked jogs under the moonlight. Sometimes their runs would end near the secluded parts of the park, their faces inches apart, breathing hard, heat pooling between them. But he'd always pull away with a cryptic smile before anything more could happen. Until that final night. The air was thick with summer humidity. Kayla showed up ready for something more, tension curling deep inside her. This time, the park was unusually silent, the kind of silence that presses on your eardrums. He wasn't at the usual spot. Disappointed but determined, she jogged deeper into the woods, past areas she'd never dared explore. Then she spotted him further down the trail, standing completely still under a broken lamppost where the light flickered unnaturally. He motioned for her to follow. Kayla hesitated, but the pull was too strong. As she stepped closer, the woods seemed to swallow them whole. The heat between them intensified as they stood chest to chest. His hand traced her wrist lightly, then gripped it firmly, leading her to an abandoned maintenance building hidden in the trees. Inside, the air was heavy and smelled faintly of rust and old wood. The atmosphere shifted. His touch became colder, his eyes darker. Kayla's excitement gave way to unease as she noticed strange markings on the wall, symbols she didn't recognize, but instinctively knew weren't good. "You came willingly," he whispered, voice deeper now, almost distorted. His hoodie slipped down to reveal something beneath the skin, a faint pulsating under his neck, like something alive moving inside him. Kayla's breath hitched as her vision blurred slightly. "What is this?" she stammered. "You're not the first," he murmured. "But maybe you'll last longer." The door behind her creaked shut by itself. When she spun around, the windows vanished. It was like the room folded in on itself. Trap. Panic surged, but her body refused to move, like her muscles were wrapped in invisible cords. He stepped closer, fingertips brushing her cheek. Where he touched her, a burning sensation spread. "You invited me in every night," he purred. "And tonight I'm staying." In the broken mirror behind him, Kayla saw his true reflection. A hollowed face, mouth stretched too wide, eyes completely black, and something writhing beneath his hoodie, pushing against the fabric like tendrils. Then the heat turned to icy dread as he whispered in her ear, "You've been running with me in my realm." Kayla realized she hadn't been jogging through her city's park at all. The woods, the isolated building, it wasn't on any map. It was a liminal space, a feeding ground. As the darkness closed in and his monstrous form loomed larger, She let out a scream, but the park swallowed it whole. The next morning, joggers found her running shoes by the trail, still warm, laces undone, but no sign of Kayla. No one saw her again. But sometimes, those who jogged too late through that park report seeing two figures sprinting just beyond the tree line. A woman running beside a hooded man, always in sync, never looking back. Story 2. The loop. Kayla loved running late at night. The empty streets, the rhythmic sound of her breathing, the hypnotic pattern of her feet striking the pavement, it helped clear her mind. After working long shifts at the hospital, jogging became her escape. One night, while running through her usual route past the old industrial district, Kayla spotted something odd. The street lights ahead flickered. No big deal. This part of town always had faulty lights. But as she approached a sharp bend around an old warehouse, she noticed something off. Ahead of her, emerging from the curve, was herself. Same black hoodie, same ponytail, same neon pink running shoes. Kayla skidded to a stop, chest heaving, staring at the other woman who mirrored her exactly. The doppelganger stared back, equally confused. Kayla rubbed her eyes and looked again, but the curve was now empty. A chill crept down her spine. She considered turning back but shrugged it off as fatigue messing with her. She continued forward, heart pounding a little faster. Minutes later, she hit the same curve. Same warehouse, same flickering streetlights. Déjà vu. No matter, she thought. Maybe she'd zoned out. She ran faster, determined to get home, but as she rounded the curve again, there she was. Her double stood beneath the light, just staring at her. Kayla froze. "Hey!" she called out. The double mimicked her perfectly, mouth moving in sync but without sound. Kayla took a step back. The double did the same. Kayla lifted her arm, the double mirrored it. It wasn't human. It was her but hollow. Kayla spun around and sprinted the opposite direction. She ran harder than she ever had, gasping for air as sweat poured down her face. Her surroundings blurred, but after what felt like 5 minutes, she found herself back at the same curve. The doppelganger was gone, but the curve remained. Her pulse thundered in her ears. This couldn't be happening. Kayla yanked out her phone to check her GPS. But the map glitched wildly, her location spinning in circles before the screen dimmed and died. She forced herself to breathe. "Just find a landmark, retrace your steps," she whispered. She jogged toward a side street. The buildings loomed taller here, windows boarded up, graffiti covering the walls. The alley felt colder, almost like stepping into a freezer. Halfway down the alley, she skidded to a stop. The alley ended at the same curve, the same flickering streetlight. She was trapped. Kayla's throat tightened as panic gripped her chest. "No, no, no," she muttered, spinning in circles. Suddenly, behind her, she heard rapid footsteps. She whirled around, expecting to see her double. Instead, it was a man, tall, thin, pale, running full speed toward her from the shadows. His eyes wide, mouth slack. "Run!" he shouted. Without thinking, Kayla bolted. The man caught up beside her, matching her pace. "You're stuck too," she gasped. "No time," he barked. "It's coming." They darted around the curve, but the scene changed. Now, instead of a city street, they were running through endless rows of empty hospital corridors, dimly lit, the walls covered with peeling paint. Kayla's stomach dropped. The fluorescent lights above buzzed and flickered. The air smelled of antiseptic and old blood. "What the hell is this?" she shouted. "The loop." The man wheezed, eyes darting. "It feeds on lost ones." They rounded another corner, back at the curve. This time her double was waiting, but the face was twisted, mouth stretched unnaturally wide in a grin. Black tar dripped from its eyes. Kayla and the man slid to a halt. The double began sprinting toward them, arms flailing like broken limbs. Kayla turned to run, but the man stopped her. "No more running," he said, voice calm now. He grabbed her shoulders and locked eyes with her. "You can't outrun it. You have to break it." "What does that mean?" The double drew closer, sprinting unnaturally fast. "You have to choose," he whispered. Kayla yanked away from him, but when she looked back, the man was gone. The double was now just feet away. Kayla clenched her fists. Her mind screamed to run, but her gut told her to face it. The moment the doppelganger lunged at her, Kayla lunged back. When their bodies collided, the world shattered like glass. Kayla blinked. She stood alone in a bright hospital hallway. No sign of the double, no sign of the man. The night was silent. Outside the window, normal city lights blinked in the distance. She stumbled out of the building and onto a familiar street. Her apartment was just a few blocks away. Breathing heavily, Kayla jogged home, her head spinning. A week later, while prepping for another late shift, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. For a split second, her reflection smiled wider than it should have, and black tar welled at the corner of its eye. Kayla backed away, trembling. Maybe she escaped the loop, or maybe it followed her home. Story 3. Echoes of music. In July 2009, a tourist in the lobby of the hotel approached her friends with complete shock. She had been shopping for postcards in the gift shop and had exited the shop while reading the backs of the ones she bought. According to her story, she still had her head down when a pair of pant legs came into view. She did the polite thing and stepped to the side to allow the man to pass, but when she did, she claimed, the legs moved to block her new path. Taken aback, she raised her head to scold the man for his rudeness, but stopped when a wave of cold air washed over her. The man, according to the woman, was dressed in clothing that seemed out of place, and his pointy beard had an old-fashioned look to it. She then watched as the man walked away toward the lobby fireplace, where he vanished out of sight. After rushing over to her friends to tell them what had happened, she was approached by another woman who had happened to overhear the conversation. This woman led the tourist toward the antique Stanley steamer automobile that sits in the hotel lobby and pointed toward the photo of Freelance Stanley on the wall behind it. The tourist was astonished. The man she had just seen with her own eyes had been dead for over 60 years. Mr. Stanley has also been seen in the billiard room, a favorite location of his during his time at the hotel. According to one report, a group of tourists were once being led through that room when a vision of Stanley appeared behind one of the tourists. Mr. Stanley also seems to have a soft spot for his beloved rocking chair on the front porch. Visible from the front desk through the large lobby windows, it has been witnessed by many to be rocking of its own volition. But if Mr. Stanley really has remained behind in the hotel after death, then he is apparently not alone. In February 1984, the night bellman was working the front desk when he heard footsteps coming from the direction of the hotel bar, known as the Cascades. The bellman leaned over the counter to peer around the corner, and in the reflection of the lobby windows, he was able to see the figure of a woman. She wore a pale 94 Aaron Mankey the World of Lore gown that he described as off the shoulder, in a Southern belle style. The bellman quickly exited the front desk area through the back doorway, but when he arrived in the side hall near the windows, no one was there. During an overnight shift in 1976, the clerk at the front desk reported hearing piano music. She left the desk and entered the music room, where the sound was coming from, but found it empty. According to her, however, the piano keys were still moving on their own. In 1994, a guest heard similar music from the direction of the music room and stepped inside. He claimed to have seen a young woman sitting at the piano, and he approached so he could watch and listen as she played. As he walked across the room, though, the girl transformed into an elderly woman before disappearing completely. The Stanleys have frequently been sighted on the main staircase in formal attire, and even in the elevator. The encounters are never violent or malevolent, but they frighten guests and staff nonetheless. Bartenders there in the Cascades claim they have even seen the deceased owner strolling through the bar. Some have given chase, only to lose sight of the ghost as it vanished into one of the walls. Whether or not you believe in ghosts, the frequency of the reports is enough to make you wonder. From glowing orbs caught on film to the faint sound of piano music drifting into the lobby, there seems to be no lack of fuel for the legends that fill those halls. But it's not just the Stanleys who haunt the hotel. Sightings have been reported throughout the structure's 4 stories, with a vast majority of them occurring in the most unwelcome of places, the guest rooms. Story 4. Just passing through in the early 1900s, many visitors to the Stanley Hotel would stay for more than a weekend. In many cases, guests would stay 96 Aaron Mankey the world of lore through the summer, and that meant arriving equipped for months of living away from home. Those of us who have spent the past few years watching the British television show Downton Abbey might be very familiar with the process. The gentlemen and ladies would arrive by carriage. In this case, steam-powered of course, along with a caravan of servants and luggage. And while the wealthy guests had access to the many finely appointed rooms of the hotel, the servants and children were relegated to the 4th floor. This was an era when children were expected to be seen but not heard, and so they played in the rooms and halls far above the heads of the guests. They slept there, played there, and even ate there in a small windowless corner of the upstairs kitchen. These days, the 4th floor is just one more level of guest rooms. According to many accounts, however, that doesn't mean the children are gone. Many of these stories center around room 418. There have been reports of the sound of balls bouncing in the dark, of high, childlike voices laughing and talking in the hall outside the room, of the clink of metal jacks on wooden flooring, and the pounding of little feet. Guests have been startled out of their sleep by voices and sounds, some of which have been captured on video. Even the staff have had experiences. The cleaning staff always enter the room with a bit of fear due to the many odd things that they have witnessed inside room 418. The television has been known to turn on and off on its own, and on at least one occasion a housekeeper has turned to see that the bed she has just made up now has the deep impression of a body in the bedspread. The room with the most activity, though, is on the 2nd floor, and there are legends as to why. It is said that in 1911 a thunderstorm caused a power outage in the hotel, sending the building into complete darkness. It was dinner time, and most of the guests were downstairs in the McGregor ballroom, but the staff still needed to provide a temporary fix for the lack of light. Because the Stanley Hotel was built at a time of transition between gas and electric lamps, the fixtures throughout the Hotel 97 Dreadful Places steam and gas were equipped for both. With the building in darkness, staff were sent from room to room with candles to light each acetylene gas lamp. But when one of the chambermaids, a woman named Elizabeth Wilson, entered room 217, something happened. It should be said that this room was the presidential suite. It was enormous and elegantly decorated in the style most beloved by Flora Stanley herself. Bright floral wallpaper with reds and pinks and greens covered the walls, and the carpet was the color of grass, with accents of red and blue. It was the jewel of the hotel. According to the legend, the light fixture in that room had a hidden leak, and the room had filled with gas. When Mrs. Wilson opened the door with her lit candle in hand, the gas ignited, setting off an explosion that destroyed nearly 10% of the hotel along the western wing. Part of the floor gave way, and several steel girders fell on tables in the ballroom below, thankfully missing the guests. Mrs. Wilson, though, was not so lucky. She fell through the floor, breaking both of her ankles when she landed. It's a good story, but there are many versions of it. 5 separate Colorado newspapers carried the story, but details varied wildly. One paper listed the chambermaid as Eva Colburn and said that she was thrown through a wall onto the porch with no injuries. In another, she was Elizabeth Lambert, who died in the fall. Still another report claimed the chambermaid was a woman named Lizzie Leitzenberger. All of the stories did agree that the explosion happened at 8 p.m. But none mentioned the thunderstorm. There are other glitches in the story. No employee records exist from this period in the hotel's history. Among the many photographs of hotel staff over the past century, there are no pictures of anyone named Elizabeth Wilson, or Lambert, or Leitzenberger. All of it has the smell of window dressing, designed to lend some credibility to the odd experiences that guests have had in room 217. Just what experiences am I referring to? Well, according to first-hand accounts, the ghost of Mrs. Wilson has been known to unpack the suitcases of guests, toss their clothing on the floor, and 98 Aaron Mankey the world of lore rearrange the bed linens. Another common report is that some guests and staff have seen a mysterious black hole in the floor, said to be the location of her fall after the explosion. The faucet in the bathtub has been known to turn on and off on its own, and maids have seen doors in the room open and close. In 1974, a man and woman arrived at the hotel at the end of the season. According to his story, they were the only guests in the entire hotel. After dinner that first night, the couple retired to bed, where the husband had a horrible nightmare. "I dreamed of my 3-year-old son running through the corridors," he later said. The boy was looking back over his shoulder, eyes wide, screaming. He was being chased by a fire hose. "I woke up with a tremendous jerk, sweating all over, within an inch of falling out of bed. I got up, lit a cigarette, sat in a chair looking out the window at the Rockies, and by the time the cigarette was done, I had the bones of the book firmly set in my mind." The man was Stephen King, and the book, of course, would later become The Shining. Story 5. The man beside me. I always jogged alone. Midnight was my time. No cars, no noise, no people. Just me and the quiet suburban streets, the rhythmic slap of my shoes on pavement, and the cool bite of the night air. One night, in late October, the streets were colder than usual. The kind of chill that sinks into your skin. The moon hung low, bleeding orange behind wisps of clouds. As I passed the old park on Wilkins Road, I noticed someone jogging ahead of me. Man, odd, I'd never seen anyone out this late before. He moved with this strange mechanical pace, shoulders stiff, arms swinging too widely, like he wasn't quite used to the motion. Still, I wasn't bothered. It was public space after all. I trailed behind him at a casual distance for about 10 minutes, matching his pace, lost in my own thoughts. Then something strange happened. At the next intersection, I expected him to cross or turn, but instead, he stopped. He didn't look back. He just stood there, unmoving, as though waiting. I slowed down, unsure. My instincts said to turn around, but my curiosity overrode my better judgment. As I approached him, keeping my breathing steady, I noticed something unsettling. His clothing looked like a thrift store version of normal jogger gear, slightly outdated, threadbare, and covered in faint dirt stains. The hoodie he wore was deep gray, the kind that seemed to absorb light. I stepped to the side to pass him, but just as I did, he started jogging again, now beside me. He never acknowledged me. He kept his head down, hoodie obscuring his face, but his pace matched mine perfectly. He sped up. So did he. I slowed to a near walk. So did he. The hair on my neck stood up. This wasn't normal. I could hear his breathing now, shallow and uneven, like he was forcing himself to mimic normal respiration. "Hey buddy, you all right?" I asked, trying to sound casual. No answer. The tension was thick, but I wasn't about to bolt like a scared kid. I took the next turn sharply, onto a less familiar side street, hoping to lose him. It worked, at least for a few moments. The street stretched ahead, empty except for my shadow. Then I heard it. The slap of footsteps behind me again. I spun around, but no one was there. The street was silent. Me. I faced forward, and my breath caught. The man was now ahead of me, standing at the corner beneath a broken streetlight, head still down. There's no way he could have gotten in front of me that fast. I turned on my heel and jogged the other way, heart hammering. I made for the park's main trail, where I knew there was an emergency phone box. But as soon as I entered the park, the air changed. Heavier. Like the atmosphere thickened. I realized in horror that all the ambient sounds, the rustling leaves, the crickets, the distant traffic, were gone. Dead silence. I ran faster. That's when I noticed it, my shadow. 2 shadows, actually. Mine and his. Though I could feel no one beside me. His shadow ran parallel, perfectly mimicking my pace. My breath quickened as panic crept in. My body screamed for me to leave the trail, to cut through the trees, but my mind was locked on reaching that phone box. I finally reached it, slamming my hand against the emergency button. Nothing. No light, no buzz, dead. Suddenly, footsteps echoed from the darkness behind me. I whipped around. There he was, emerging from the black, face still hidden. "Who are you?" I shouted. No response. Instead, he did something worse. Slowly, he raised his hand and pointed upward. I followed his gesture, and felt my stomach drop. Above me on the trees, shadows dangled. Like limp marionettes hanging upside down from the branches. Shadows with no bodies casting them. I staggered back. He took a step forward, finally tilting his head to meet my eyes. Under the hood, there was nothing but a gaping black void, deep and infinite, like staring into a well that went on forever. But deep inside I saw something shift. Faces. Twisted, pale faces swirling in the void like they were drowning inside him. My legs gave out. I hit the ground hard, scrambling backward as he moved toward me, slow and steady. "No," I whispered. "This isn't real." He crouched down, inches from me now. And then, in the dead quiet of the night, he finally spoke, voice like wind through a hollow tree. "You're late." I blacked out. I woke up at dawn, lying on the side of the trail. The park was normal again, birds chirping, leaves rustling. My limbs ached, but otherwise I was unharmed. No sign of him. But when I got home, I noticed something in my bathroom mirror. When I stepped into the light, there was a faint mark on my neck. A dark fingerprint. Every midnight since, no matter where I am, on the street, in my apartment, even in a crowded gym, I always catch a glimpse of a shadow jogging beside me, just out of the corner of my eye. And each night he gets closer,